The most famous and important theoretical contribution to the Federalist Papers is James Madison's analysis of political factions and the dangers of a majority faction in a pure democracy. Beginning with his celebrated Federalist Paper number 10, Madison argues for the superiority of republics over democracies. The Constitution, he maintains, will guard against the abuse and degeneration of liberty which many theorists believe must occur in a republic. After the American War for Independence, many European intellectuals viewed the American Republic as an experiment, a novelty, and a dangerous novelty to boot. They questioned the durability of republics with a skepticism that sprang from a European conservative heritage. Republican governments, this heritage maintained, succumbed to the turbulence of unlimited majority rule. Republics, lacking stability and order, plummet societies into chaos. Then, inevitably, a demagogue appears on the scene to restore order. From a republican government, therefore, emerges tyranny. This is the theory presented by Edmund Burke in his famous book Reflections on the Revolution in France. James Madison was extraordinarily well-read and acutely aware of this classic objection to republics. Post-war America, in his eyes, was in crisis. It suffered from an excess of liberty, from the threat of unlimited majority rule. Critics predicted this fate, and Madison searched for a way out of the downward spiral. How can liberty be preserved in a republic? This question haunts Madison, and in the Federalist Papers he develops a solution, beginning with Federalist Paper number 10. Ancient democracies, Madison believes, degenerated into chaos and tyranny. Although the constitutions adopted by various American states incorporated some safeguards against a similar fate, these safeguards were insufficient.
The instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into the public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished, as they continue to be the favorite and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most specious declamations. The valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models, both ancient and modern, cannot certainly be too much admired. But it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have as effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected.
The primary danger confronting a democracy, Madison argues, is the disorder caused by various factions competing for the reins of power. But what is a faction?
By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community.
Madison's analysis of factions has been praised for its political realism.
The most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. Those who are creditors and those who are debtors fall under a like discrimination. A landed interest, a manufacturing interest, a mercantile interest, a moneyed interest, with many lesser interests, grow up of necessity in civilized nations and divide them into different classes, actuated by different sentiments and views. The regulation of these various and interfering interests forms the principal task of modern legislation and involves the spirit of party and faction in the necessary and ordinary operations of government.
How can factional conflicts be controlled and liberty be preserved? Well, we could eliminate the basic cause of factions. But this, Madison warns, would eliminate liberty itself.
Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an element without which it instantly expires. But it could not be a less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air. which is essential to animal life, because it imparts to fire its destructive agency.
Only one alternative is acceptable to Madison.
The inference to which we are brought is that the causes of faction cannot be removed, and that relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effects.
The most dangerous threat to liberty is a faction which includes a majority of the people, and thus is able to overpower and force its will on the minority.
When a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion or interest both the public good and the rights of other citizens. To secure the public good and private rights against the danger of such a faction, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed.
This is what Madison means by the evils or the dangers of democracy. He means a majority with unchecked power. And he agrees with conventional wisdom that pure democracies, lacking safeguards against majority factions, will degenerate into chaos and destroy liberty.
A pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert results from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been found spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have, in general, been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths.
Having set the stage for the eventual decay of liberty in a pure democracy, Madison explains how the Constitution solves this thorny, age-old problem. The Constitution guards against the dangers of democracy. It establishes a republic instead. This distinction between a democracy and a republic is central to Madison's argument.
A republic, by which I mean a government in which a scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect, and promises the cure for which we are seeking. Let us examine the points in which it varies from pure democracy, and we shall comprehend both the nature of the cure and the efficacy which it must derive from the union.
Madison lists two advantages of a republic over a democracy. First, the people in a republic elect representatives, directly or indirectly. This filtering process of political selection produces wise and virtuous rulers. These far-sighted rulers, versed in the potential dangers of factional collisions, will guide the people better than the people can guide themselves.
The effect is to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. Under such a regulation, it may well happen that the public voice, pronounced by the representatives of the people, will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by the people themselves, convened for the purpose.
Second, the wise and virtuous will gravitate to the top, that is, to the national government established by the Constitution. Remember, this assumption was crucial to the Federalist case. The best and brightest argument was a major component of Madison's solution to factional disputes, and his solution, in turn, became his chief argument in favor of the Constitution. Radical Republicans also supported representative government, but for different reasons. For them, political representatives were a convenience dictated by necessity. Gathering the people to vote in person on every issue would be unwieldy, so the people delegated this responsibility to elected officials. But radical Republicans viewed these elected officials with cautious, jealous eyes. They were not presumed to be wiser or more virtuous than anyone else. The best and brightest argument was a radical departure from this tradition. As Madison elaborates on his cure for factional conflict, he departs even more drastically. Recall that according to radical republicanism, liberty is best preserved in a small geographical area. Why? First, because the people can keep a tight rein on their rulers. Second, because small communities are likely to share common values, thereby decreasing the likelihood of factional conflict. Sam Adams, steeped in this tradition, expands on this second reason in voicing his concerns about the proposed Constitution.
Is it to be expected that general laws can be adapted to the feelings of the more eastern and more southern parts of so extensive a nation? It appears to me difficult, if practicable. Hence then may we not look for discontent, mistrust, disaffection to government, and frequent insurrections, which will require standing armies to suppress them in one place and another, where they may happen to arise.
Madison, taking his cue from the Scottish philosopher David Hume, stands this argument on its head. In a small society, Madison argues, a majority faction can easily dictate to minorities, because there are few competing factions able to resist. In a large society, however, there are many factions, and it is not likely that any one faction will dominate.
Extend the sphere, and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests. You make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens, or if such a common motive exists, it will be more difficult for all who feel it to discover their own strength and to act in unison with each other.
Now, Madison uses his theory of factions to defend the Constitution. By establishing a republic over a large geographical area, the Constitution is better able than individual states to quell factional disputes.
The influence of factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through the other states. A religious sect may degenerate into a political faction in a part of the Confederacy, but the variety of sects dispersed over the entire face of it must secure the national councils against any danger from that source. A rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it. In the same proportion as such, a malady is more likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state.
Alexander Hamilton supplements Madison's position with an argument that is sometimes overlooked by commentators. If rulers get out of control, Hamilton claims, rebellion is more likely to succeed in a large republic than in a small republic. State governments, close to their people, can crush a rebellion before it gets off the ground.
The usurpers, clothed with the forms of legal authority, can too often crush the opposition in embryo. The smaller the extent of the territory, the more difficult will it be for the people to form a regular or systematic plan of opposition, and the more easy will it be to defeat their early efforts.
A large territory gives better odds for successful rebellion.
The obstacles to usurpation and the facilities of resistance increase with the increased extent of the state, provided the citizens understand their rights and are disposed to defend them. The natural strength of the people in a large community, in proportion to the artificial strength of the government, is greater than in a small, and of course more competent to a struggle with the attempts of the government to establish a tyranny.
Somehow, this does not sound like Alexander Hamilton, champion of stable and energetic government. And somehow, Hamilton's argument lacks persuasive power, especially when compared to Madison's. But Hamilton knew his audience. The Constitution, he says, would make another revolution easier, should revolution become necessary. This undoubtedly appealed to many Americans, reared in a revolutionary tradition. Madison's final appeal to abandon a bias for small republics also tugs at revolutionary heartstrings.
Why is the experiment of an extended republic to be rejected merely because it may comprise what is new? Is it not the glory of the people of America that whilst they have paid a decent regard to the opinions of former times and other nations, they have not suffered a blind veneration for antiquity, for custom, or for names to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense, the knowledge of their situation, and the lessons of their own experience? To this manly spirit posterity will be indebted for the possession, and the world for the example of the numerous innovations displayed on the American theater in favor of private rights and public happiness.